Hi, I'm John Byrne with Poets and Quants. Welcome to our webinar today. We're going to discuss the journey of an MBA applicant. And to do that, we have three terrific panelists. We have from the Educational Testing Service, ETS, Alexandra Atkins, who is in charge of brand marketing at ETS. Welcome. We have Dan Bauer, the founder of the MBA Exchange, one of the leading MBA admissions consulting firms. And we have from LA, we love LA, Setia Witzer, who is with UCLA's admissions office. She is an associate director of admissions at UCLA's Anderson School of Management. So welcome, everybody. So, the people in the audience today will be at various stages in the journey. And so some of the discussion is going to be very pertinent for some and maybe less pertinent for others. But we want to explore that long and winding road that people take when they want to get into a highly selective and elite MBA program. And increasingly, more and more people are using the GRE to get into a business school. And that's why Alexandra is here to talk a little bit about that. But, the first question, I think, is how does someone know that the MBA degree is really for them? There are a number of people who may be looking at different options. And in fact, that's one of the advantages of a GRE because you can apply it to many different master's programs. And you find that at some schools, there's a very high percentage of people who take the GRE, like at Yale, where 22% of the people who get admitted on a GRE. But how do you know if the MBA degree is really for you? Why don't we start with Setia at UCLA?
Thanks for the question, John. It's interesting. I am an alum of Anderson as well. And I think at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, am I doing this because it's on my personal checklist for some reason, right? Do I want to make a career transition? Am I looking to build my skills if I love what I do? And I think from there, setting your professional goal first in the 1 year, 3 year, 5 year period can really help you hone down to what type of program is the best fit for me, right? And for many people, whether they're in business fields currently or not, the idea of moving up into management, right, moving into tough industries like consulting or banking, the MBA is a natural route into those fields. And so I think that personally for me, it just felt like the right point to kind of pivot my career and invest in myself for more reflection at that stage.
Right. And Dan, how would you basically articulate the value an MBA degree today?
Your curriculum is what's going to deliver that. So what knowledge will you gain that will be usable and applicable to the goal that you want to achieve? The second is your perspective. How do you view the world? How do you view the business world? How do you view the world in general? And how do you view yourself? Is it broad enough? Is it strategic enough? Most people, the typical MBA candidate has been schooled in a relatively narrow discipline, maybe has one job, two jobs. How can they rapidly broaden that perspective and deepen it? And I think that's the second key. And then the third criterion would usually be relationships, the network. What type of people, not just who, but what type of individuals, in what roles, in what organizations would accelerate your achievement of your goal and your progress toward your goal. So knowledge, perspective, and relationships, those are that's the value proposition for a great MBA.
Okay, great. Now, full disclosure, I do not have an MBA, and I'm the only one here who doesn't have an MBA. Dan has an MBA from Harvard. Setia has an MBA, as she mentioned before, from UCLA Anderson, and Alexandra has an MBA from Indiana Kelley. So, Alexandra, how has your MBA helped you in your professional life?
Well, actually, it's really interesting. The 3 points that Dan mentioned all contributed to why I chose to pursue an MBA. So my undergraduate degree, also in kind of full disclosure, was engineering. And I was one of those people who started out in one career path and then after a few years decided that I needed to make a shift. So I went to pursue an MBA in order to facilitate the transition, and then also to be able to accelerate the rate at which I was able to accomplish my personal goals, like Satya mentioned. So I made the shift from engineering into brand management. So I went to Kelley School. The way that the MBA enabled me to accomplish my professional goals is I really wanted to be closer to the strategy guiding the businesses that I supported or worked on, and wanted to be closer to a consumer. So from gathering or collecting that additional business acumen, building the networks through my experience in my MBA program, enabled me to get my internship and ultimately my first job in consumer marketing. So it was really kind of like the catapult that enabled me to make the transition, to make it swiftly, to do it, to acquire the skills I needed to be able to be successful in that. And then now today, it ultimately kind of ushered in my ability to get to where I am today. So.
Great. You know, one thing we haven't talked about is ROI. I mean, one reason why a lot of people get an MBA degree is, frankly, to make more money. There's nothing wrong with that, okay? In fact, that's why I'm such an advocate for the degree, because, you know, I know you can look at the sticker prices on the tuition and you could faint, but the truth is the ROI on an MBA is exceptional. It's one of the highest value return of any graduate degree you can get outside of probably computer science today. And it's a heck of a lot easier to get an MBA than it is master's in computer science, I might add. Even though, Alexandra, you have the engineering background, so it would have been easy for you. But the ROI is unmistakable. In general, 3.5 years for the degree to be back. And you evaluate the ROI on information that's in. What I mean by that is you evaluate it by starting salaries and signing bonuses, when in fact that's only the beginning. You know, when you have a job and you're in well into six figures, your increases are an awful lot larger than when you're not in six figures, and that's just a fact. The other thing that does open up opportunities, promotions. You're looked at differently in the managerial elite as opposed to those who don't have an MBA. And as has been covered here, there are certain industries that, frankly, you can't get into, like high-level management consulting or investment banking, or a lot of the finance jobs, or even in many cases, consumer packaged goods companies that are very sophisticated in how they market to the public. So that's all good, but the one thing that I really think I really love about the MBA is what I love about higher education. The more you avail yourself to higher education, the more likely you are to meet great people and create friendships that will endure throughout your lifetime. And it enriches your life far beyond the monetary awards of a job that you might not be able to get if you didn't have the MBA. So, and I'm talking what's wonderful about the MBA is you don't have to go to a top 10 school to realize your dreams. And you don't have to go to even a top 25 school to make the MBA pay back for you. The evidence is that across the board, no matter almost whatever school you go to, there's a really solid return on the degree. So what I want to talk a little bit about and this, some of the people that are in the webinar today are going to be feeling this right now, because it's a long journey, it's a hard journey. What are essentially pain points and challenges that a person can logically expect who goes on this journey? Alexandra, we'll start with you because I know one of the major pain points is the darn test. The standardized test is kind of scary for someone for 3 to 5 years in this move from undergraduate education where they've had to take tests every week or every other week. So, what do you have for us?
I'm sorry, there was a little bit of feedback, but I think I heard that what are the pain points associated with pursuing an MBA? And yes, one of them is the fact that you will have to take an admissions test. I understand that it can be a pain point, but there's another way to look at it, right? So it is a door to opportunity. And one of the things that you have to think about as you're preparing for your application process or the whole admissions process is making sure that you allow enough time for the introspection that my colleagues here on the webinar have mentioned, but also for the preparation for the process, because it can be time consuming. The preparing for the test can be time consuming. Putting together the different components of your application can also be very time consuming. And you want to be able to have enough time, to give all of those their due course.
Of course, you were an engineer, so the quant stuff is really easy for you.
Well, I mean, all test taking, I'm sure, presents its challenges. I may not have struggled with the quant side, but all test taking presents its challenges.
Dan, what do you see as some of the other major pain points for people who want to go on this journey?
So John, I'm reflecting on about 5,000 different applicants that we've worked with at the MBA Exchange. And so I'm going to generalize it a little bit. All of these won't apply to everybody, but I think they will resonate with a lot of applicants. One pain point is revisiting your undergraduate academic performance. Many individuals who didn't live up to their potential and expectations as undergrads, they've been able to put that aside. They graduated, they got a great job, life is good. Now they're dusting off that transcript that they have filed away in the back of the drawer and realizing, once again, that's a factor in their future. And that is a definite pain point. It's not the end of the game. There's things that can be done, but that's one that some people find painful. Another is doing sort of this professional assessment of yourself. Even though you may be 2, 3, 4 years into your career, now it's time to compare yourself with others, overachievers in your industry. How well are you really doing? What have you really achieved that's tangible or quantified? And in the time left before you apply, what more can you do that would benefit yourself? I think two more. The next one is the need to formulate a hypothetical goal. The reality is that most people, I think, go to business school to find what they want to do. But in order to get in, you've got to have a hypothesis, a valid, relevant one that's compelling and interesting, because that's a window into your candidacy for the admissions committee. And then lastly is a basic one. That's the need to communicate with strangers in the path to getting recommenders, in meeting students, alumni, asking questions, info sessions. You're face to face with some poker-faced individual, not the world's greatest extrovert. That can be a pain point. So I'd say those are the common ones that I've experienced.
Okay, now our youngest panelist, who only got out of business school, 4 years ago, is Satya. So I'm sure you can recall very vividly the biggest challenge you had in applying to business school. Tell us what it was.
I think it was understanding actually the letter recommendation process. Because I think many people are in a position where you don't want to tell your boss or your company potentially that you're exploring an option, right, that will take you off the promotion track or the track you're on. And I used to struggle with how many recommendation letters can I ask them to write? 4, 5? And I think there's great organizations out there now, like Consortium and GMAC, that are creating like common letters of rec templates. So your recommenders do have a lower burden to help you. But I just remember struggling with that. Like, who do I ask? Who really is passionate about my development and understands my goals, whether I'm still working with them or not? So you kind of have to get creative. And that's where I tell people to really talk to each school about what they're looking for and who do they recommend sometimes, just because each school does have their own preference too.
Right. Which gets to the point where if you haven't been schmoozing people, recommenders, and laying the groundwork for a really candid and honest conversation where you can remind or recommend things that you've done that help him or her write a really solid recommendation letter for you. You better start right away. Right, Dan?
You got it, John.
So, a lot of people say, and I wonder if how true is this? So, Alexander, how true was it for you that before you actually decide to write these applications and these essays, there's a need to go through a period of introspection about your life, where you've come from, where you are, and where you want to be? Did that happen for you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It started first with having to really be introspective around what I was currently doing in my career, and then whether or not that was the trajectory I wanted to continue on. When I looked around in the role that I was in, the folks that had the kind of job that I wanted happened to be in a different function. And so I had to think of whether or not I could navigate from where I was to the new function easily or not. And when I looked towards what I wanted to be, it was either going to be a much longer road going through the internal routes or potentially a much quicker path by going to pursue an MBA. So then I also had to think of what value the MBA could provide to me beyond like my next 1, 2, or 3 potential assignments, and look longer term. And I know longer term doesn't have to be 20 or 30 years, but even 5 years out or 7 years out, and what the MBA could give me access to or afford me. So I went back in order to get the skills that I needed to be able to be more competitive in the career or the field that I wanted to be in. And then I also went back in order to be able to network, so meet other people who were trying to do the same things that I wanted to do. And then to give me a broader academic understanding, but also like a network that I could call on for the next 5 years, 10 years, and beyond.
Right. And I just want to remind everyone out there that we are going to ask you questions. We have polls throughout the event. So just click on the little boxes, the multiple choice boxes, and we're going to get to the answers later on. And it may, in fact, help us inform the webinar. So Dan, what steps should you take to put yourself in the right place to actually do well during the application process? What steps should you be taking?
Well, I would say, John, the first step is to do a real gut check. This is not something from a financial standpoint or an emotional standpoint that will be easy. The key is to know yourself, look within, and decide if you're playing to win in order to get in, and that you can stay the course and complete the program. So this isn't a frivolous decision. It's time for that reality check. I think the next thing would be to get a candid assessment of your competitiveness. We give free evaluations for applicants, and it's very eye-opening for a lot of them. Either they're a lot stronger than they thought they were, and they are competitive, and they're good to go, or they've overlooked something or hoped the school would overlook something, and they need to know that early on. And then I'd say the third thing would be to do a deep dive into the various programs, try to find the multiple schools that would best support your goal, where the culture is a fit for you, where you'd enjoy being, and where the relationships are likely to include people who are complementary to you. So I'd say those are 3 big steps to take before jumping into this.
So Setia, what do you think about rankings? A lot of people start their journey looking at the landscape of schools and where they're ranked and the pecking order. What's your sense of that?
And I admit that when I was looking at schools, I started with the rankings too.
You did.
I did, John, with Poets and Quants as well as Economists. You know how it is. I think it's a starting point for many people because you just realize how many great MBA programs are out there. And as you reflect on your undergrad experience, perhaps, right, big campus, small campus, what environment you're comfortable succeeding in, I do think the rankings kind of can inform that initial process, right? If I could go to any school that's great in the area I want to go into, potentially, or the region I want to work in, the rankings do help narrow down that list initially. But I think it's so important that people don't just depend on the rankings, right? Because this is where, as Alexandra has mentioned too, like the network, the fit component comes in. And that's where when you do that deep dive research that Dan mentioned, the rankings almost, I think for me at least, kind of like took a back seat because it had helped me funnel it down, and then the research helped me really narrow. If that makes sense.
Right, and part of the research is talking to alumni, current students, visiting the campus, getting a feel for it, knowing what you want out of the program, because obviously some schools have better faculty in one area over another area, or they may have aspects of the program, whether it's an international immersion, experiential learning today, a great entrepreneurship program that may be suited for you far more than actually where the school ranks, right?
Right, completely.
So obviously, as we mentioned earlier, one of the first hurdles for many candidates is the standardized test. And, you know, one of the things that's happened in the last 10 years or so is how the GRE has become a real option for a lot of people. It's accepted by every major business school in the world. And frankly, like I mentioned before, unlike any other test, it does keep candidates' options open, because I know I speak a lot to people who sometimes are thinking about a master's in public policy or a master's in health, along with an MBA, or for people who are actually applying the dual degree programs. Obviously, a GRE is going to be better for you, because then you only have to take one test instead of two. And now you even see Harvard, Northwestern, and Georgetown law schools accept the GRE. So my question is, how do you prep for a standardized test? How much time should you devote to it? And how many times should you take one? Alexandra, you're a test expert. Go ahead.
Okay, surely. Well, the questions were, how long should you take to prep?
Yeah. How long and how much time should you devote to it, or expect to devote to it?
Yeah.
How many times does a typical applicant take a test? Because, you know, now there's no penalty for and going at it again.
Yeah. Well, okay, so let me just start first by approach towards the preparation process. It's very difficult for me to kind of generalize on how much time it might take an individual to prepare, because it's really based on a whole host of factors. But what I would encourage any person, regardless of which assessment that you are planning to take, is to first start by taking practice tests. Take as many as possible in order to familiarize yourself with the test content, to understand how the environment might be, so that is not a variable that's impacting your performance. So you can start by taking practice tests. I know for GRE, we offer free practice tests, Power Prep Online. You can there are 2 that you can take for free. Based on that, you can get a gauge of where you stand relative to the institutions that you are, or programs that you're interested in pursuing, and get a gauge of where you might stand in comparison to the population that tends to take tests. And from there, you can determine what your study plan is, and then start to collect your preparation materials. If you're weaker on quant and want to boost your quant scores, you may want to focus a little bit more on that. Or if you need to work on verbal or writing, then you may want to choose to focus on either of those 2. But there are a lot of preparation materials that are available. We happen to have a variety of free materials available, like a math review or introduction to the quantitative reasoning section. We have the same types of materials available for practicing for the verbal reasoning section as well. There are paid materials that are also available that can help you in the preparation process. But ultimately, you need to take the practice tests so that you know what it is that you can work on and can develop a plan to execute against that. One other thing that I would suggest that you do is not approach the test prep process alone. So there are communities where you can work with others, bounce test taking ideas and strategies off of each other, practice together. So the networking part doesn't have to start after you start your MBA. It can start before in the preparation process as well. One thing that I want to mention as it specifically relates to GRE, for those that are less familiar, in the chat section, we can provide you some additional information about the materials that we have available for those that are specifically interested in learning more about the GRE.
So it really comes down to that old saying about Carnegie Hall. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? You practice, you practice, you practice.
Yeah, practice, practice, practice.
Getting the comfort level with the test is really crucial, and the research does show that if you take the test again, you tend to score better, right?
Yeah, yes, it does show. And then in fact, one of the benefits of GRE in particular is that if you do take the test, the official test, so like you actually go, we're not talking about practice tests, but sit for an administration, get your official scores, and then choose to try to beat your score and take the test again or multiple times. All of those scores do not have to be reported to your institutions. You can use our score select option where you can select which administration you want to send the scores from and to which institution you want to send them to. So that's a great benefit for taking the GRE in particular.
True, although sometimes I think that an admissions committee that sees someone who really wants to go to an MBA program so badly that they'll take the test 3 or 4 times and it will show improvements could actually be to the benefit of an applicant. Is that true, Cynthia?
Absolutely. I absolutely encourage every applicant to show me the progress they've made. What they think is a great score could or could not, be a great score for the school. But at the same time, if I'm seeing the dedication you've shown, the grit, the resilience, and I can really see growth, even if it's, across different areas, it gives me a fuller picture of not just your academic profile, but your willingness to really invest in this process of yourself.
Right. And Dan, obviously, when you deal with applicants who are at the very early stage of test taking before they have to dig into the applications and write the essays and get recommenders and all that kind of thing, what general advice do you have for people who are at that start point?
Well, one thing, John, that we talk about is this relatively new liberalized policy on cancellations. On the surface, it's a blessing. You keep doing it until you get it right. In another sense, it's a curse. It allows and maybe even encourages applicants to stay in this comfort zone of prepping for a test, taking the test, prepping, retaking, before they move on to the other more subjective, open-ended aspects. So what we tell them is the sooner you can get that optimal score and move on to the other aspects of this, the better. So that's part of the motivation for us to recommend to most people starting to work with a one-on-one tutor, regardless of how good or poorly you think you'll do, starting with a one-on-one tutor with a flexible program. You start with as much as you think you need, and then you either stop when you get it or you keep going, is a smart way to go. The sooner they can get the test behind them, get that above average score, and get on with the rest of the party, the stronger the overall application is going to be. So that's really the start of our advice.
Now, one thing I've noticed is that when schools report their GRE numbers and you take the equivalent comparison chart, schools seem to be more flexible and more willing to take a GRE score that might be below the average of what their equivalent GMAT would be. Why do you think that's so, Dan?
Well, I think we're dealing with still a transition here of the GRE gaining in acceptance. Those who were the first to take it, this is a generalization, but those who were first to take it were those who had some sense that the GMAT was not going to produce as good of a score, or they've tried it and it just didn't work, and here's a life ring for the first time, something else I can try, and maybe it will come out different. So, I think likewise, as the schools get used to seeing how admitted applicants who've taken the GRE, how they perform in the class, how their grades do, how they are recruited afterwards, because there are recruiting situations when a company will ask for your test score, even though you're now finished with business school. So I think we need a little bit more history, and my hunch is that gap between the average GRE in terms of GMAT equivalent and the actual GMAT scores, that gap will narrow. because frankly, the schools and recruiters don't need to do any favors for applicants by allowing that gap to exist. So I believe it will narrow.
Right. And Satya, are you seeing more applicants with GRE scores, and does it, do you weigh them differently in admissions decisions or not?
We are definitely seeing more applicants with GRE scores. I think it's a good test, right? If you're not sure if you're only applying to MBA schools, right? Like you mentioned earlier, John. I also think that when we look at it, if people have taken both tests, for instance, at the end of the day, we will always take your highest score because we want to, look favorably upon applicants. We want you to be successful. So at the end of the day, your best result is what our team will consider. I've spoken to my other peer schools, and in many cases.
So let's say you take the test 3 times, and on one test you score the highest on the quant, on another test you score the highest on the verbal. Mm-hmm. Would you take the highest from the 2 tests?
So from a total score perspective, at least at UCLA Anderson, we'll look at the total score as the highest. However, I do still want to see the breakout, to your point, and we do ask candidates to break it out because I still want to know that at a percentile level, right, that you can still excel in one area at a time. So this is where I don't want people to cancel their scores when they think that they haven't done well enough on something, because every growth, every change, we definitely notice.
Yeah. And to me, it just shows intent. I mean, look, to me, standardized tests would be torture. So if you're going to take this thing 3 or 4 times and you're actually improving each time, I think that really proves that you really want to go to a good MBA program. You're willing to put in the work, and it means that if I accept you and you come here, I know you're going to give it all, and that's a real positive to me. Okay, so we talked a little bit about is how do you decide which schools to go to? You might want to amplify on that. So Alexandra, you were an engineer. You knew you wanted to get into marketing. Indiana County has a great marketing program, and it's a real feeder to some major companies like Procter & Gamble that are the giants in consumer packaged goods. Is that why Kelly was on your short list?
Absolutely. It was not only on my short list, it was my #1 school. So I was looking to make that transition, and I was looking at institutions that had relationships with, as you mentioned, the giants in consumer packaged goods marketing, and brand management, which is ultimately what I wanted to get into as I got out of business school. So Kelly had the great relationships. They also had some specialty areas. So they had academies, which allowed greater focus. So there was a consumer marketing academy, very strong faculty in the space. So it is ultimately why Kelly was on my short list. And then after a visit and doing the networking and understanding the fit and the feel of the program, it was no question for me.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important part, knowing where you want to go, what you want to do with it, and then looking at career management reports and faculty centers of excellence to decide what school might be best for you. A lot of people think, when they think technology, which is extremely hot right now, and it's the most dynamic part of our economy, they may often think of the Bay Area. But in fact, what's happened at UCLA, and this is kind of interesting to me, is that UCLA used to send the largest percentage of its class into finance every year, and now it's technology. And there's a tremendous startup culture in and around LA that a lot of people might not immediately think about, and it goes well beyond media and entertainment. So it does require a little digging here and there and thinking and research, and a great place to start, Poets and Quants. So Dan, how many schools should an applicant actually be applying to in general? I mean, you don't apply to just one, right?
Well, in my case, I did apply to just one. I'm the outlier. I applied to business school in my 30s. I had a dream of Harvard Business School. And for my career at that point, I didn't want a lot of options. I don't recommend that to most people. You mentioned Poets and Quants a moment ago. Well, speaking of Poets and Quants, I read in a story earlier in the week that through the data, it looks like 5 is the optimal number for most people. That's not too far wrong. I would have said intuitively 4 to 5 for most folks. 2 thoughts. One is, don't apply to any school that you wouldn't proudly go to if it's the only one you get into. That helps to keep the list shorter. This is not about applying, it's about getting admitted and enrolling and graduating. So that's one thought. So at the MBA Exchange, what we advise clients to do is view this as an investment portfolio. You want some asset allocation there. So you've got your A schools with high risk and high reward, harder to get into. The payback for you could be higher. Then you've got the C schools, very good schools. They satisfy your goals. You'd feel comfortable there, but it's a little bit easier to get into, a little less selective, and good reward, but less risk. Then in the middle is the larger group, which are the Bs. They align very well with where you are, what you want to do. You've got a good shot at getting in. Then look at the A's, B's, and C's and decide where do you want to allocate more of your time and energy. If you want to heavy up on the A's with higher reward and higher risk, then go for it. Maybe you're a younger applicant and you can reapply the next year or the next year, so go for the gold. Maybe if you're more like I was, this is a point in your life where you want to apply one time, this is it. You want to heavy up on the C's perhaps, where you'd have a better chance. And then the B's, of course, are there for anybody. So I guess looking at it as an investment portfolio, we find that to be a good strategy.
Great idea. Satya, is there any advantage in applying to round one?
I think for candidates who are ready, right, in terms of the test prep and they've been working on their essays and spending, time on the reflection process, it's great to show a school how excited you are by applying in round one. But I do think that in many cases, when we talk about fellowships or just your overall strength of the application, you should submit when it's right for you. And for many schools, round two is just as equal a playing field in terms of seats and financial aid. So my biggest advice to people is round one or round two. I don't really believe it's a big difference. I think that you honestly just want to submit it when you're ready.
Now, is it true that round one tends to be the most competitive round because you're looking at all the eager beavers who've been working really hard over the summer months. They've taken this really seriously, and they tend to be the, killer. Is that true or not?
I think it does tend to be true, right? Because if you're think about this, like you're going to basically submit in October, right? Mostly you started this process potentially even a year or two before. It's really such an in-depth process that it's great to see people who are excited, like you said, ready. So yes, round one, probably a little bit more competitive.
Alexandra, do you think you should visit a school before you apply to it? Or is that even possible if you're applying to 5 or 6 schools?
Well, in my personal case, I visited all of the schools that I applied to. I was in that 4 to 5 range, and it absolutely made a difference because in the event where you get accepted into multiple institutions, that fit that was mentioned earlier was a critical part, at least for me, in making my decision. It was really having the opportunity to interact with the faculty and the student body when I visited that made it very easy for me to make my decision.
Right. And having been to UCLA, I've talked to a lot of students over a number of years who say it was the campus visit that basically sold them entirely. Mm-hmm. They came there not knowing exactly what to expect in LA and all this, and the students just, won them over entirely. So I think it really is important to, if you can, sample the culture, have lunch with some students, attend a class, talk to some faculty on the side, wander around. And this is not like that undergraduate tour where, based on how friendly the tour guide is and how funny you might want to go to the school, or whether or not it rained on the day or the sun was out and all the students are on the lawn in the courtyard. This is more, you got to kick the tires and really get a better feel for these different schools. So, Dan, how do you write an effective essay? Big question.
Thoughtfully and over time. I think first the key is to sort of dissect the question. Read between the lines. Why are they interested in this? Why are they asking that? What traits, what strengths, what self-awareness is the school probably looking for by asking that? Then I think the second step is to really know yourself, understand your strengths, your vulnerabilities, your aspirations, your values. Know yourself, be able to articulate and let them inside in answering that question. extremely important. Then I would say the next key thing is the structure of your answer. By sticking with a skeletal outline before you start to write the next great novel, you're going to save a lot of time and assure yourself that the structure is logical and easy to follow. So stick with the outline as you're starting to construct it. And then I think another final discipline would be allocate the word count. If it's a school that has a word count limit, allocate word count against portions of the outline. That way you won't find yourself 2/3 of the way into the essay having exhausted the word count and not told the best aspects of your story. So try to achieve balance by allocating time. And then finally, reread it and reread it and reread it and have others read it, but be thoughtful about who you're getting feedback from. The experience level of friends and colleagues may not be that long or that objective. And so be careful about who you get feedback from, but see.
So Alexandra, do you remember how many drafts you went through on your various essays to the schools?
Wow. I did prepare many drafts.
You strike me,
I did prepare.
You strike me as someone who would really, you do 10, 20 drafts. That's what I think.
Well, I don't know about 10 or 20, but I definitely did not submit my first, second, or third draft. I did not submit my first, second, or third draft, but it wasn't 20.
Right. And, it varies, right? I mean, I've seen people who've done one draft and they actually did it the night before it was due. And I've seen people who've done literally 30, 40 drafts to get it right. And sure, many of those are just little tweaks, but still it's a redo of some kind. And I know on our site we have a number of actual essays, particularly from Harvard, that we've been able to get. And one of the things that strikes me about the essays is that they're all over the place. In some cases they're beautifully crafted. You would think Malcolm Gladwell from the New Yorker sat down at his computer and knocked out some of these. And then in other cases you'd think that someone who is writing technical manuals in some esoteric part of the government wrote them. And it basically didn't make any difference because the other parts of the application offset whatever damage an essay could have done. So my question here is kind of a difficult one because I know it varies from candidate to candidate. But Setia, if you had to weigh the different components of an application and tell me what you put more emphasis on than others, what would it be?
I honestly think that if you take all the different components by school, I would at the end of the day tell you to divide it by the number of components and 100% divided by that, because at the end of the day, I think of an application as like a puzzle that I'm building of you. And each piece really informs that whole picture I get. And so as much as I think people want to drill it down to like one part of the application being like it, for many schools, honestly, it's like you said, the holistic picture. And I only get that from the different pieces. So honestly, I really do divide by the number of parts.
Okay, now I just wanted to remind everyone we are going to leave time for questions for our panelists. So if you have questions, I would be preparing them now and submitting them to us so that in a few minutes when we turn to them, we're ready to go with that. So let's assume you've applied to your 5 or 6 or whatever schools. You've taken your test. You're happy with the result. You've done your essays. And now, as if by wizardry, you've been accepted for an interview. What should a person expect in a typical admissions interview? Dan?
So first of all, I'd say the thing to expect is that you'll get lost or be late. And that, to avoid having that cost you a night's sleep before the interview, get the logistics, have it all lined up. If you're in town and can do it, walk over there the night before and know where you're going. You don't need that added stress. I think another important thing would be to, again, refresh yourself on your application, know your candidacy, look back at your notes and think about the things you didn't include in your essays, but you want to get across. In other words, think of the interview as a conversation. You have an agenda, they have an agenda. Use it accordingly. And if you don't have the ammunition lined up in advance, you won't get that opportunity.
Right.
And then I guess then the last thing I would say is prepare and practice under stressful circumstances. You want the practice to be more uncomfortable than the actual interview. You don't want to be surprised by that.
Are you talking like sit in a room without windows and shine a light on you as if you are been captured by terrorists? What are you talking about?
I'm talking about two things. One is asking yourself the really tough questions, the ones you don't want to answer. It's great to emphasize those, and you know what they are because you know what your weaknesses and vulnerabilities are. That's part of the stress and duress. And the other is to have someone posing questions to you who will, let's say, replicate that poker-faced lack of reinforcement that you might get.
Right.
Admissions, outside of the interview process, admissions officers tend to be delightful people, warm-hearted, caring, all that good stuff. But during that interview, many of them are not. And so the sooner you can get a taste of that, it can be unnerving. Why not do that during your practice rather than during the actual interview? So I'd say those are things to keep in mind other than the obvious.
And as a general rule, those who are invited to interview, basically half to 60% do ultimately get admitted, right?
It depends on the school, John. It can be closer to 50% at some of the more selective schools. But yes, once you've got that interview invitation, now you are truly in the game and have a lot more control over your destiny than you did just as an applicant.
Now, Cynthia, do you interview candidates?
I do, but many times actually.
Are you a tricky interviewer or are you a straight at you interviewer?
You know what? I want to see consistency with their story that you presented in the application and the resume. I think red flags just pop up if you aren't consistent.
Yeah, that's a really good point because I have sat in on admission committee meetings at several schools, and consistency is a really key component. You know, do the recommendations line up with what you're saying in the essay and what you've written in the application? Do the meetings that you've had with admissions officers in different places line up with your story? And where there are inconsistencies, there are red flags that are problematic, because here's the deal. Almost every applicant pool has roughly anywhere between 70 and 80% of the applicants are fully qualified to attend the school and do well in the MBA program. And many of the schools that we talk about here and elsewhere on Poets and Quants obviously can only accept anywhere from 6% to maybe 25% of the people who apply. That means that a lot of really good qualified people are not getting in. So it's important to, you know, do your best at each stage of this. Just to finish off our part of the discussion before we go to the Q&A, we've got some great questions that are getting lined up in the queue here. I want you to tell me what it was like to receive that acceptance that you got, Alexandra from Indiana Kelly. What do you remember where you were and you remember how you felt?
Wow. So I can't tell you exactly where I was getting the mail because at that
snail mail. You're not that old.
They were mailing the acceptance letters. I know, right? I was like, I think I'm revealing my age. But nonetheless, the way that I felt, oh my gosh, it was a huge personal triumph and the start of a turning point in my life from one career to another, the opening of like a long pathway with lots of doors that now are available for me to be able to open and to pursue. It was unbelievable and exciting and rewarding, and that was just the first step, getting the acceptance letter. It was just the first step.
Cynthia, how about you? Do you remember where you were and how you felt when you were accepted to Anderson?
Absolutely. I was at work, so I ducked into a conference room and whispered on my phone when they called me and said, "Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I gotta go." But it felt great.
Did you scream?
Quietly. I did.
Dan, how about you?
First of all, numb, I would say. If rereading the same document 5 times to make sure that it read the same way each time was key for me. But I think I would say an emotional dichotomy. At the same time, if one can see their past and their future flash before their eyes, that was the moment when it happened for me. If somebody can feel, humbled, well, empowered at the same time, that happened for me. So it's a dizzying moment that I will never forget. I still have the letter. If I've had a tough day of doing something, I'll, every couple of years I'll come across it as I'm digging through a drawer, and you get to relive a pivotal moment, and I wouldn't trade it for any of the experiences in my life.
Terrific. So let's get to the questions. Christopher asks, he obviously is early in the process. Do you only report your overall score to the schools, or do you have to report your individual quant and verbal scores? Obviously, you report the whole thing, so they see your quant scores and you see your verbal scores. And that's quite important because one of the big questions admissions committees have is, can you do the quant work in the core? And basically, these tests are primarily designed to give assurance to a school that you can successfully complete the core. Let's see, what can you ask an AdCom that is not available online to get to know more about the program? That's a common issue because applicants don't want to appear dumb, and they don't want to appear as if they haven't been on your website and have not absorbed all the material that you have out there. So what's like a clever, smart question to show an applicant at his best when he or she is meeting with an admissions official? Cynthia?
I think tailoring the questions to your interests. It's okay for you to say, I'm thinking about a career in X. What specific resources would you recommend at the school for me? And that's a great way, right? A way out for you, for me to introduce all the new material. I think the second thing I would say is to ask about the interview process. We alluded to the fact that many schools do have different processes. We don't necessarily post all that information on our websites. So it's a fair question to ask any school.
Right. Dan, you have any suggestions?
I do, John. I think that one of the keys to using the question to your advantage as an applicant is to bring up something, front end the question with some aspect of your candidacy that may not have been emphasized or asked about. It's your last chance before that door closes to get something across. So front-ending a question that relates to your candidacy and then relating that to the program. For example, we didn't talk about a particular community organization I belong to. I see that there's not a club like that on campus right now. Is there a precedent for first-year students starting clubs like that? So now you've made your point and you've asked a thoughtful question that the admissions interviewer will be happy to answer.
And schools would love that question because almost all schools, when they look at candidates, are looking at how will this person contribute to our community? What will they add? What kind of extra value are we going to get that's going to help our culture, help our school? And just that question alone suggests, obviously, you're going to be proactive in creating a club that may be appealing to others. In other words, you are ready and willing to make a contribution to that community. That's a real plus for an applicant. Miguel asks, I am above the 88th percentile of all test takers overall, but only 57% above in the quant section. Will that weaken my application for a top 10 business school? Alexandra, what do you think?
Actually, I would defer to what Dan might think, having had plenty of experience advising applicants, or Satya having plenty of experience evaluating applications.
Satya, what do you say?
So remind me the question, the percentile question, right? About 80th percentile, 57th percentile. I would say this, it depends a lot on the rest of your academic profile. Look at your undergraduate major, right? If you were in engineering or math and you did well, then you have shown me that academically you'll be fine in class. If you come from a different background that's perhaps not as quant heavy, then you can see where maybe taking an extra accounting or econ class to show me you can get an A in that class will help supplement that profile.
Right. Well, here's a good question. What is a good GRE score? And is it more competitive for an Indian applicant or an international applicant who might be in the sort of overrepresented part of the pool for a top school? Dan?
Well, so the rule of thumb that we use, John, is we like to see a GMAT equivalent that's equal to the average GMAT score. That way there's no second guessing. The gap we talked about a moment ago about the GMAT equivalent of the average GRE admit versus the average GMAT, again, I don't want to count on that when it comes to betting a candidacy. So our target is always the average GMAT score or higher in terms of the equivalent from that GRE score.
Right. And Galaxy asks, he's a 30-year-old and whether he'd be eligible for the GRE. Of course you can. I can even take it at my age. So you can take it at any age. The question is, are you then a little bit outside the window for an MBA program? Sethi, what do you say? You wouldn't discourage a 30-year-old applicant who really wants an MBA, right?
Absolutely not. If you look at the school ranges, many school range from as young as 23 to 40 in full-time programs. And you really have to consider at the end of the day, what job, right? What post-MBA goal do you have? And that's why I would argue if you're looking for a director level role or a higher role, executive MBAs, right? Part-time MBAs might make more sense.
Here's a question that's kind of interesting. If a student happens to apply late in round 3, will the application be considered for the next year's round 1 or early round? Do we need to apply again? You need to apply again if you didn't make round 3. And round 3, in most cases, is a lot harder because here's why. A lot of the seats have already been filled. And what admissions officers do in round 3, in many cases, is they're crafting the class. So they may not have enough consultants, they may not have enough nonprofit people or people with government experience. So now they're trying to get the mix right in that round 3. And so if you happen to be lucky and you're in the part of the pool where they really want to draw from and get more diversity in that class and round it out, good for you. But if you're not so good. So here's another one. Here's a question related to experiences with JD and MBA graduates. I think you got to be a masochist to go for a dual degree in law and business, but hey, some people do it and they love it. What career paths have you seen with JD MBA graduates? Who wants to take that one? Dan.
One area that comes to mind, John, would be in the technology arena and the startup arena in that space. Individuals that want to get involved in developing and protecting intellectual property, having both a business sense of the potential of that IP and the legal sense of how to protect it, how to safeguard it. That would be a case where a JD MBA could be a very valuable tool early in a career.
Here's another good question. If I went to a state school that was not highly ranked, will obtaining a master's degree from a top university help me in getting into a great MBA program? Sethi, what do you think?
I don't think that's like necessary, honestly. I think we look more about the quality of your involvement, the quality of the curriculum you pursued at that school, not necessarily the school ranking as much as people think. That's my personal opinion.
Right. So here's a good one from John for Alexandra. Given the recent poll results, I'm surprised many people view switching careers as a reason to go to a business school. What do you make of that?
So I'm sorry because I didn't see what the poll result was. So was it high or low?
A lot of people, yeah, it must have been high. As we know, the majority of people who go for an MBA are in fact seeking a transition from one career to another. And we even call some people 3 jumpers, right? They want to jump discipline, industry, and geography.
Yeah.
And the triple jump which is always harder to do, but in fact, an MBA allows you to do it.
It sounds like you just answered the question.
Yeah, I guess so. Here's the deal.
I mean,
you know, in many places in the world, when you are in your late 20s, sadly, your destiny has almost been decided for you. And the beautiful thing about the MBA, it is the degree of reinvention is how I like to look at it. Here you might have taken a path that might have been good for you in the beginning, but now you're looking at the rest of your life and you're saying to yourself, you know, I wish I had done X or Y or Z. And the MBA degree is like getting that incredible, magnificent second chance to do exactly what you want to do. And so that's why so many people, in fact, get the degree to switch careers. Because if you're in finance and you hate finance, you want to go to marketing, or you work for a hedge fund and you hate it, and you want to become a consultant, or you want to become a corporate executive and actually do stuff for real, like Alexandra does at ETS. You might get the MBA and get that chance to get the dream job and the dream discipline in the right industry and the right geography. You may be in a foreign country and you want a chance to work in the United States. You may be in the US and you want a chance to work in Europe. You may be in New Jersey and you want to work in California. The MBA is like a magic transporter to get you there.
I'm not,
right?
I was gonna say, I'm not surprised by the fact that there are a lot of people that are choosing to pursue MBAs in order to facilitate a career switch. It's ultimately what I ended up doing. But a lot of people start out in pursuing one discipline or career, because in undergrad, you end up making decisions very early in your life and very young. And then you might find, as was the case in my case, where you get out, even though you may have enjoyed studying it, but then practically what you're expected to do day to day is not something you could imagine doing for the next 20 years of your life. And so then you decide to look around and see what else might be of interest. And so I chose to pursue an MBA so that I could gather the knowledge that I did not have in order to be able to be effective in the business world. And so that was, so long story short, it's not surprising to me.
We are running out of time. I'm gonna give you one more question, even though we're a little over, and it's from Maria, and she asks, how do MBA admission committees perceive CPAs? What if I worked at a national firm, but not a Big Four? Is that a plus, minus? Dan, what do you think?
So first of all, there's respect for the rigor that comes with being a CPA. There's no question about analytical ability, quantability, so kudos for having that. However, ... what's the rest of the candidacy look like? What have you done in the community? What did you do as an undergraduate student? What's your cross-cultural awareness? How enthusiastic are your recommenders about you as a person as well as a CPA? So it can't be isolated. It neither makes the candidacy a slam dunk, nor does it assure that it's not going to bear fruit. So look at the big picture. What are the other pieces of the candidacy that beyond a CPA that make you competitive and attractive?
Great. Again, it comes back to that holistic review we've talked about. I think that's another aspect of business school admissions that is often absent from many other master's programs, including the law degree. You are typically looked at as a whole candidate. Yes, it's possible that a standardized test score could weigh more heavily in the decision, or your undergraduate GPA, or your work experience, or the college you went to, or the organization that currently employs you, or what you've done in extracurricular activities, or what leadership potential you show, how well you do in an interview, your professional presence when you visited school. There are a lot of different variables that come into play here, and they all change in terms of their weight based on your own individual candidacy and what the school wants and needs. I want to thank our three panelists for a terrific, fantastic job. Alexandra, thank you so much from ETS. Satya from UCLA Anderson, and Dan Bauer from the MBA Exchange. Thank you for joining us and participating. For all of you who have asked questions that we couldn't get to, we will be answering them. And in fact, this is being recorded, so it's archived. If you'd like to look at it again and want to recommend it to your friends, please do so. Meantime, I'm John Byrne with Poets and Quants. Thanks for watching.